Hello, everyone. Is Beth Yes. Okay. It's working. What's up, Beth?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm so excited for Beth and I to be here with you. What's really interesting is that some of you have heard us talking about shared sisterhood since way before the book came out. And it is really sort of surreal because coming here is like coming home. And so we're here now after the book has been published. It's been doing really well, it's been winning awards. But what we want to do is sort of start off by talking about the origin story of the book. We're going to just dive right in. Beth, we're going to take it back, okay?
Yeah. Tell them how we met, Tina.
Okay, so Beth and I have written this book, and we are sisters, and we'll get into defining that. We're actually really good girlfriends, but it was not love at first sight. So it was at the Academy of Management. It's when I was working on actually weight discrimination work. Madupe, remember that? I was working on with a team with Myrtle Bell and some other folks. And I had just presented the paper at the Academy. You know, you get off the stage, and sometimes there's a queue of people waiting to talk to you. And Beth skipped up to me, for real, legitimately skipped up to me. And I did not know her. And I didn't know if I should shake her hand or call security. So we start talking, and I'm very resistant. And can I be vulnerable with you all? Okay. I didn't trust Beth. I've been in multiple careers. I've been in banking, consulting, and in the academy. And in each of those domains, I've been stabbed in the back by white women. So when Beth skipped up to me, I didn't know if she was coming to help me or hurt me. I didn't know if she was coming to assist me or steal my academic ideas. I had no idea. But Beth was really friendly. Beth, do you want to take it over from there?
Well, I mean, you're free to talk about how friendly I am all you want, but there probably was back then actual skipping involved too. I know you're, a little hyperbole, but probably not that much in terms of how I came up. In terms of the people who know me in here know that there probably was indeed skipping involved back then. But yeah, you're always polite. And I think that's the thing. It was always politeness, but there was definitely a resistance. And we knew some mutual folks. We had some mutual friends. But at that point, you didn't know that. And you didn't know who I was. And I could sense the resistance, but yet I wanted to get to know you better. And I wanted to get to know more of the work that you were doing and potentially work with you. We were kind of in similar stages in our career at that point in time. And it was something I wanted to do. And so I had a choice to make, right, at that point in time, where I could be very defensive and say, well, I don't understand why she's like being resistant to me. I'm super nice. Why doesn't she trust me? Like, why? I would just assume, like, why wouldn't you? Or I could try to empathize with her a little bit and understand, why she might not trust me right off the bat, and why I might need to do a little bit of work to prove myself trustworthy, and that's not an insult to have to prove your trustworthiness if you're trying to build a relationship with someone that you want to build a relationship with. And I think that it was that foundation and us having to work to build trust that allowed us to build the relationship to be able to write a book like this.
And so, what I think is really interesting about the story, the origin story of Beth and I, is that it's actually a case study for shared sisterhood. And we're going to dig into, no pun intended, we're going to dig into the three critical aspects of shared sisterhood. And before we go on, shared sisterhood is what Beth and I call our radically optimistic philosophy on how we can actually begin to dismantle systemic inequities. And we wrote the book because we really do feel like there's stagnation in racial and gender equity. If you turn on the news, I mean, when you go back to the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, think about the headlines. Think about the way that you felt. I felt sick to my stomach. I went into a cave. I did not want to talk to anyone. I remember we had a shared sisterhood group where we actually watched the verdict come in, because I needed other people who I could talk to. I remember calling Laura, and there were so many people I had to reach out to. We also wanted to move from a conversation that often focuses on individuals to systems. Look, implicit bias is great. That's fabulous. But you could eradicate implicit bias at the individual level and you would still have systemic racism. And I know I'm speaking to a room full of people who know that. But unfortunately, in many of the organizations that we consult with, many of the students who we teach, they do not get that. They want to stay at the individual level of analysis. And I think it's because when you do that, you don't actually have to address power. Power is critical, and Shared Sisterhood is designed to do that. Beth, do you want to speak about radical optimism?
Yeah, I do. And I want to just say one point to that, moving from individuals to systems, we as researchers in management and organizational behavior and having the background that we do, we talk about this stuff all the time. We talk about meso level stuff. We talk about the way you aggregate outcomes from individuals to systems and the theory behind that. And that was missing in a lot of the conversations, the lay conversations on DEI and on solving this problem that we heard, which was a lot of change hearts and minds and a lot of, well, hearts and minds don't matter, just change systems. And Tina and I said, well, why not both, right? What if we could get people, to the systemic change from their individual hearts and minds, the systemic change through the relationships with other people. And we felt that was what was missing, this connection with others. And one thing that Tina and I realized very early on in our relationship was that we shared this sort of radical optimism. And what we mean by that is we feel like we can change things, right? We feel like we can create change. And it's that optimism, that feeling that we can do something that moves us and drives us to try to find not the solution, but a solution, something that can help improve something for some people. And we also recognize, though, that to be optimistic like that is a choice, and it is sometimes a radical choice because, again, back to what Tina said, because of what we see all the time, because of the real world, the realism that surrounds us. And so we wanted to write this book because we were kind of tired of waiting for other people to write it. And I think that's a lesson for us all, right? When you're waiting for other people to write the thing, don't, right? And we decided to step into that breach and do it together and do the hard thing, to try to say, here's our theory behind how we can get from changing individual hearts and minds to changing systems through building relationships with people who are different from ourselves. Which gets us to what Shared Sisterhood is. Actually, Tina, talk about where you came up with that term, and then we'll go into what the processes are, if you will.
Well, actually, Shared Sisterhood, there was Bernardo Furman, is he here? Stacy Blakebeard. So we were at a PDW, and I was actually asked to put flesh on the term. There was a discussion about it. So someone had said sisterhood, shared sisterhood. I was like, let me take that. Let me run with it. So it started with me at work coming up with sort of fleshing it out. I'm married to a historian, Frederick Douglass Opie, and I was at home trying to figure out why is it that, and initially it was me search. Why is it that Black and white women have not come together? If feminism is real, why are we so segregated at work? Why don't we help each other? So I read history, looked at labor economics, and I realized that there was a lack of many things, trust being one of the critical ingredients. Understanding being one of the critical ingredients, empathy being another one. And then I wanted to understand what would be necessary, what would be a necessary process to rectify that. And I realized, and Beth and I actually had some debate because there was a need to address, as Beth said, hearts and minds, but also systems. And I know some people will push back. They're like, I don't care what you really think about me. If you like me, just put it in a policy. But I think we have seen what can happen with policies alone. I think we've seen what happens when we try to only address hearts and minds. You need both, I believe, to have the best outcomes. Beth, do you want to add anything?
No, I think I was fortunate enough that we started talking about this, over 5 years ago now. And, I think when you're talking about building relationships, and one of the things we know in academia is sometimes the best ideas come via collaboration. And Tina said to write about sisterhood, I need a sister. And so we came together to write about the three components of shared sisterhood. And so Tina has started to talk a little bit about the dig, which is the hearts and minds, right? How do you do that? So I'll just talk a little bit about that. And then Tina, if you want to talk about bridge after I'm done with dig, sound good?
Actually, let me talk about. I want to talk about digging. Let's switch it
Okay, let's flip
because
flop that. Okay, go
because
ahead. Yeah, yeah,
well
yeah.
because I think the when Beth skipped up to me, that you have that illustration in your head. I had to dig, and dig is about surfacing your own assumptions, your beliefs. I was like, what is this girl doing? White girl doing? I don't trust her. But I had to ask myself. I had to dig. Has she done anything to demonstrate herself to be untrustworthy? The answer was no. So what's up, Tina? Why don't you trust her? I had to go through the fact that I had been backstabbed by so many white women. And then I realized I wasn't individuating. I was processing Beth as a proxy for all white women, which is not fair. So then I had to challenge myself. I had to dig. There was so much unpacking to do. And what I want you to recognize is, in Shared Sisterhood, we address the issue of power, and we define power as control over and access to resources: time, money, people, the ability to control whose history is studied or not, what books get banned or not. That is power. Historically, there are some people groups who've had access to power: white people, men, heterosexual people, Christian people, tall people, fit people. And historically, there have been some groups, and that's just examples. Historically, there have been some groups that have been more marginalized: Black people, Latinx people, gay people, Muslim people, atheist people. Okay? When Beth and I were interacting, I was primarily assessing her on the axis of whiteness and Blackness. As we got to know each other, which she'll talk about in Bridge, I came to realize we have many things in common. Beth is an atheist, I'm a Christian, so there's a power difference there. But if I hadn't done the dig work, I never would have gotten to know that. And I would have missed out on a really beautiful relationship. The final thing I'll say is that while it was unfair that I processed Beth as a proxy for all white people, it was absolutely adaptive. And if we switch to the example of gender, how many women in the room, or let me say this, how many people who do not identify as men, if you go out, it's late at night, you push 9 and 1 on your phone, and you hover your finger over the last one, just in case some joker jumps out from the alley, how many of you have put your keys between your fingers in case you need to jab somebody in the eye? Does that mean that you hate all men? It's not a rhetorical question. Does that mean that you hate all men? Why do you do that? Statistically, what? It could happen, and who is likely to be the perpetrator? A man. Sorry, white people, statistically speaking, while the media would have you believe that I'm the threat, most violence towards Black people comes from you. It's not the other way around. I hate to tell, in the workplace, that is the way that it happens. So, but I still had to recognize that while that was adaptive and protective, if I did not take that armor down, it would not have allowed sun and water to get to me to foster the relationship that Beth and I now have. So that's dig. Beth, you want to talk about bridge?
Absolutely. So digging, and both of us had to do our own dig functions here, right? Like I had to also dig into how I felt about how I approached Tina and why I expected to be trusted right off the bat, and without having to prove myself, which is a ridiculous assumption, and yet one that I held. And we all had a lot of digging that we had to do in different ways. And we started at different points of that journey in terms of how we understand power and how we needed to understand power. But one of the key things that we try to add with shared sisterhood is this idea of bridge, that in order to get from digging into changing our hearts and minds to collective action to change systems, we have to bridge with other people who are different than us. And we call bridge a form of authentic connections. We build on the positive psychology conception of high quality connections to talk about what these authentic connections with people who are different from you are. And we hypothesize that they consist of 4 different things, which is showing empathy, demonstrating vulnerability, establishing trust, and taking risks on behalf of the other person in order to help establish those things. And in shared sisterhood, what that means is when you interact with people, particularly those who are different than you, right, on those axes that we were talking about, those axes of power, when you interact with other people, your interactions, when possible, should be authentic in that they demonstrate these 4 things. So we expect that when, Tina and I first interacted, for instance, and started to build the bridge, I had to empathize with why she was standoffish with me, right? And I had to demonstrate my vulnerability to put myself out there, to take risks, to stand up, right? And say things and do things to demonstrate, right, that I was trustworthy so we could establish trust. And in doing that, we, both of us sort of had to start from different places and building this authentic relationships where I had to kind of start with empathy and she had to kind of, start with trusting me. And we built towards this strong bridge that in every time we interacted, so long as we were interacting authentically, we were able to build this bridge up. And importantly, and something Tina and I always say is that doesn't mean we happen to be really good friends, but that doesn't mean you have to be really good friends, because we hear a lot from people like, I don't have the energy to have any more friends right now, right? Like I have a lot of friends, I don't have the energy to have friends. There are people that I build bridges with in the workplace who I wouldn't hang out with. Like I'm not like going to their house and stuff, but I know that I can trust that they're going to stand up for me if I'm not in the room. I know, right, that I can authentically connect with them in those ways. And it's those sort of connections that we talk about when we talk about bridge. Tina?
Yes, and I know we have about 3.5 minutes left, so we're gonna let's
We only have
fast
2 more
forward.
slides. We're good. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the final step, which is also important. So once you've done dig and you've bridged and you have authentic interpersonal connections with people, now you're ready for some juicy collective action, which is where you can link arms with people. And we like to say that there are at least 8 core people processes, from onboarding, recruiting, evaluation, training, performance, all those things.
So the idea is that as we build bridges with certain people, we bring in other connections, right? And this is general social network stuff that we've talked about, but it's about building these connections authentically. It also means that there might be people who don't want to bridge with me, like they're just like not interested, which is completely fine because
They're lost.
Thank you. But it is okay, right? Because if they're bridging with Tina and I'm bridging with Tina, we're still able to work collectively because we can build this network together authentically to be able to do the work of collective action.
Yeah, so once you have this lattice work of connections and you link arms, you can start with one of those people processes that I just mentioned, the recruiting, the onboarding, et cetera, et cetera. And then you want to focus on metrics for success. What we want to do with collective action is actually hold people accountable. And this is getting very practitioner focused. Is that all right with y'all? I know there's practitioners in the room, but we're also academics. But hey, y'all have known me since I was a doctoral student. I've always done this, which has gotten me in trouble from jump. So what we do is shared sisterhood is very action oriented. So when we talk about collective action, we encourage organizations to pick one of those people processes and to nail that thing down. So if you're going to really focus on evaluations, for example, or salaries, pay and promotion, we want you to say, I don't know, let's do a performance audit or a pay audit by gender, by race, by division. And why don't we figure out how we're going to report that thing out? Are we going to report it out to the division? Who's responsible? What's the budget that we're going to allocate to actually correct it? If we find disparities, how are we going to reconcile those things? Are we going to actually redress historical inequities? That's a big issue. When you find out that women and Black people have been underpaid for 10 years, do you just say, sorry, folks? Or do you actually make them whole? Those are all of the kinds of things that we address with organizations with Shared Sisterhood. It is actually working. If you don't believe me, there's a Harvard Business Review article where we actually provide data with organizations we've done this with. Beth, I will let you have the last word.
Well, the last thing that I'll say is, the goal of this was to move from individual hearts and minds to collective action towards redressing historical inequities in the workplace. And we believe one of the reasons that Shared Sisterhood might be a good solution for this is because it contrasts with more transactional approaches. We know you get leaders in place who believe this with their hearts, and then those leaders leave, right? Those policies are only as often require the sort of hearts and minds changes from the leaders to implement them. And when you have a network of people, right, who have built bridges with each other, they're able to put a lot more pressure on those leadership structures to change. And with that, we're done. Thank you for letting me log into the Zoom, by the way. I appreciate you all for letting me, because it's in Iowa. I'm teaching today. Y'all know how that is. So thank you.